My friends, the strategic vacuum that protected Brasília from its own totalitarian decisions has just been blown apart by the White House. What we're witnessing is not ordinary bureaucratic friction, but the definitive tightening of the steel noose around the Palacio do Planalto and the Supreme Federal Court. Immediately forget the tamed narratives, the partisan pamphlets, and the doctored headlines from the mainstream press that try to convince you that the Brazilian government still has any relevance or respect on the international stage. Ambassador Maga arrives with the Senate's approval, not to engage in dialogue with the aging relic occupying the presidency, but to monitor the perimeter and ensure institutional protection. With his eyes fixed on an inevitable power transition on the national stage, the Brasília establishment operated under the false illusion that political impunity and the abuses committed within our borders would remain locked away in dead files, without any global power demanding a financial and political reckoning. But recess just ended violently. On June 1st, 2026, the American government delivered a direct blow to the stomach of Itamaraty by sending to the Senate the official nomination of lawyer and political leader Daniel Pérez to take the position of United States ambassador to Brazil. Look at the level of tactical signaling that Washington put on the table. Pérez is not a career bureaucratic official trained to smile at formal dinners. He is the physical embodiment of an authentic mage sentinel positioned at the forefront of the continent. He is 37 years old, a lawyer by profession, and presided over the Florida House of Representatives, operating in a very close-knit manner, alongside the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the Chief of Staff of the Trump presidency, Susie Wise. He is the son of first-generation Cuban exiles and has in his blood a legacy of fighting against the totalitarian mechanisms that the São Paulo Forum networks are trying to revive in Latin America. Lula and his minister Mauro Vieira were expecting a passive career ambassador, someone shaped to drink coffee, dance samba, and build convenient bridges with the courts of different cultures. But instead, they got a fighter trained directly in the Republican barracks of Miami, Palm Beach, and Mar-a-Lago. Since 2025, when the Democratic ambassador left the post, Donald Trump kept the American embassy vacant, showing absolute disdain for the current Brazilian leader. The implicit message of keeping the post vacant for so long was already a declaration of isolation. And now, the nomination of Pérez puts the cards on the table to force the system to back down. The Planalto tried to change the international playing field by accepting a Venezuelan general sanctioned for international crimes as a military attaché on Brazilian soil. But the American response was a tight knot around the left's throat. Do you understand that? There is an unbridgeable gap between the Jurassic thinking of an aging relic and the speed of response of the new geopolitical axis that operates under the doctrine of values. While Itamaraty desperately clings to analog concepts from the 1970s, trying to bargain ideological neutrality to protect neighboring failed dictatorships, the US State Department and Vice President Oyvens are taking a relentless confrontational approach, whose motto was publicly outlined at the Munich conference. Either we share the same values of freedom of speech and free market, or we are on opposite sides in global security. The behavior of Lula and his team resembles that of communist dinosaurs, trying to run archaic commands of state control within a modern ecosystem of free data flow, causing system crashes that push the country toward isolation. And in the panic of those who see the water rising and funding disappearing in Western markets, Mauro Vieira organized an emergency official trip to China to beg for diplomatic help and fake factory partnerships. Not being able to contain the tightening American chokehold, but the miscalculation is fatal, my friends. History proves with macroeconomic data that Communist China has no interest whatsoever in saving decadent ideological partners or financing the survival of isolated leaders. It acts strictly as a financial predator, feeding on real assets and collecting geopolitical corpses. São Paulo wisdom from Globo. Sucking the wealth out of Cuba and draining Venezuela's oil infrastructure while leaving the populations of these countries rotting in absolute misery. As soon as the price of economic friction with Washington gets too high, Look at Iran, China's longtime partner, and actually the partner China relies on the most to buy cheap oil. What happened with the Ayatollah? He was eliminated in the first minutes of the war. There wasn't a single Chinese person to press the button to save the so-called Ayatollah. Yeah, that's friendship for you. Well, Brazil is being pushed with eyes wide open into a complete geopolitical desert. Stripped of strategic alliances with the West and turned into a second-rate colony for the export of cheap raw materials. All because the old guard of the Planalto prefers the loneliness of tyrants to submitting to the laws of the free world. Did you get that? Now subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell and like the video because it takes a lot of work to make it, my friends. Because what I'm going to show you here now isn't an opinion, it's an inventory of bankruptcy. The American government listed point by point who is to blame for the destruction of our economy, and the first name on the list is going to make Brasília tremble. Section 301 isn't a tax, it's a guided missile. It ignores the Planalto. And it hits directly the port, the farm, and the factory. Is the economy paying the price for the ideology of the Planalto and the Supreme Court? The Office of the United States Trade Representative activated a high-precision sensor when it published the confidential Section 301 report. 301 proposing the imposition of a punitive tariff barrier of 25% on a wide list of goods imported from Brazil. Look at the level of makeup and trickery that the old Brazilian media, led by Folha de São Paulo and Poder 360, is trying to pull off behind the scenes to protect the government. They published shameful headlines claiming that the American investigation targets the PIX system, piracy on 25 de Março Street, and illegal deforestation in the Amazon. It's all a lie. It's all a smokescreen to deceive the average citizen. Because when you lift the hood of the report and examine the broken engine of the document, point number, the absolute heart of the economic sanctions are the secret and illegal censorship orders issued by Alexandre de Moraes and the Brazilian courts against the American digital platforms. Did you get that? The real reason for the 25% tariffs from the United States? Don't fall for the narrative. Judicial authoritarianism is no longer just a domestic problem and has officially become a sovereign liability that threatens companies. And the property rights in the United States, blatantly violating the First Amendment of the American Constitution. The pages of the forensic report detail in depth how the Hubble platform has been completely banned and suspended from Brazilian territory since February 2025 for having refused to comply with secret orders to delete accounts of American residents, choosing to defend the freedom of expression of its users. The document exposes the arbitrary freezing of financial assets, real estate, and bank accounts, and even the illegal blocking of a corporate aircraft from entering or leaving Brazil during the siege against Platform X between August and October of 2022 and 2024. In addition to censorship and clandestine demonetization carried out against channels and podcast profiles of Brazilians living in Florida, like Monarch, who even in 2026 remain banned from public debate by secret court orders that violate the right to defense. The journalist Paulo Figueiredo, for example, only found out about the details behind the block against him because the American Congress released the emails exchanged between the Superior Electoral Court and Twitter, exposing secret paragraphs that overrode the civil rights framework for the internet without any legal process. Congressman Jim Jordan's staff revealed the secret moral orders that violated the rights of defense. And to ban journalists without a legal 48-hour notice period, the cost of this imperial arrogance came in the form of gross taxes and the so-called moral tariff, which is 25%. And what is the real price that Brazilian producers, farmers, and entrepreneurs will pay to sustain the abuses of power in Brasília? The American precision sensor didn't stop there. He scanned all the country's structural flaws. The report condemns the PIX system because the central bank acts simultaneously as both regulator and owner of the tool, and it requires a public CPF and CNPJ transactions, creating an anti-competitive barrier against foreign platforms. Unlike the ZIL system in the United States or MBMW in Portugal, where the national identity is not used. American Bolsonaro about statute and tax. Do you understand the difference? The document specifically mentions the decision by Minister Diaz Toffoli in 2017, which in 2023 led to the annulment of all mutual evidence. From the leniency agreements of Operation Car Wash signed with the construction companies, classifying the act as a systemic failure in the fight against corruption in the country and a direct attack on international investors, adding to the market blockade imposed against American ethanol to complete the diagnosis of a country controlled by an elite that broke the rules of the global market. My friends, few people talk about this, but the boomerang of censorship now puts Brasília in an existential fight for survival. Either the system accepts unconditional surrender or it plunges once and for all into the abyss of financial isolation. Trump's clock has 3 fatal chimes. The first one has already sounded. The second, on June 22, is the end of the defense deadline, and the third, the commercial guillotine. Lula's government has less than 30 days of oxygen left. The report from Session 301 established a short-term tactical schedule that acts as a real sword of Damocles hanging over the country's finances. The public comment process was opened and the Trade Commission set strict deadlines. After the opening on June 1, the schedule sets June 22nd as the date for reviewing the Brazilian responses. July 1st is set for the submission of written objections, and July 6th for the official public hearing before the consolidated report is delivered to the desk of the American presidency. Donald Trump is using time and bureaucratic inertia as a tool of maximum psychological pressure, holding back the signing of the tariff decree to see what the next move of the Brazilian government will be. And by the way, we've already been in this negotiation for many months, and so far Brazil hasn't achieved absolutely anything. Not even getting Trump to remove the PCC and Comando Vermelho from the terrorist organization list. They couldn't manage that. The dilemma is on the table. If Lula decides to double down on the ideological stance, rejecting the diplomatic credentials of Ambassador Daniel Pérez after the Senate hearing, or ignoring the demands for market opening and an end to censorship contained in the report, Trump will press the button to activate a 25% tax and tariff before the end of the year, sparing only the aviation and aerospace parts sector, which interests the American market. My friends, we have reached the tactical choke point of this geopolitical report, where real power crushes any illusion fueled by the official propaganda from Brasília. And we haven't even mentioned the Magnitsky Act, which is already on the table, ready to be brought back, against Alexandre de Moraes and other authorities connected to these same cases of abuses against American companies, American citizens, and freedom of speech. Yes, my friends, the Magnitsky Act could come back in the next few days. And as the analyst Brian Winter rightly pointed out behind the scenes in Washington, the American administration does not have a single straightforward line of action. It is made up of multiple independent centers of power that push different priorities. While some sectors of the Pentagon seek to preserve access to rare earth reserves and critical minerals from Brazilian territory as a tactical advantage against China's expansion, the wing linked to the MAGA movement and the State Department demands the immediate crushing of governments aligned with the São Paulo Forum to restore the conservative balance on the continent. But the bureaucratic commercial process of Section 301 has its own inertia that no behind-the-scenes agreement can stop. And the bill for institutional abuses and political persecution was presented to the Brazilian judicial Olympus. Given this reading of raw data, the strategic verdict is definitively drawn and your mind needs to take a clear binary stance in the comments. Far from any emotional opinion, I don't want an emotional opinion. I want the technical verdict from someone who understands the board. Do you see the engineered checkmate or the danger of a desperate response from Brasília? On one hand, do you see that the unfolding of this tariff barrier and the tightening by the new sentinels will force the courts to back down and ensure the restoration of fundamental rights in the country, consolidating the victory of real legal sovereignty against the tyrants? Or on the other hand, do you think that the aging relic of the Planalto will double down on its ideological bet and drag the country's productive sector into the abyss of an economic suffocation unprecedented in our history? Write your technical verdict below in the comments. Sovereignty or suffocation? Which path will Lula and Moraes take? And I will personally analyze each response to identify who is tuned in to backstage geopolitical intelligence and who remains blinded by the narratives of the mainstream press. The data I brought here, the capital flow and the diplomatic movements we've been discussing throughout this broadcast represent only the surface of a much deeper and more dangerous institutional crisis. We don't make cheap predictions, guesses, or empty promises on the internet. We need to work with the raw facts before the system decides to tune into the next rupture on the world map. That's why I invite you to join our intelligence bunker now, QR code appearing on your screen now. It's a restricted and fully sovereign environment where orders from above can't take us off the air, where more than 3,000 elite analysts cross-reference information from border sensors, cyber monitoring, and commercial intelligence reports. All in real time, anticipating the moves on the board long before they become headlines on television. What I've revealed to you here is just the surface. Those inside our intelligence bunker are already monitoring these signs of saturation and risk reports long before this network goes down. Now access is in the first pinned comment and in the video description. Click the link and come protect your mind. And we also have our own series and movies channel. If you're tired of spending hours looking for something interesting, something cool and fun to enjoy with your family, you've found the right place. We've already done that for you. Don't waste any more time choosing a cool series or movie, so the link is in the description, in the first pinned comment, and in the card that will appear. We even launched a podcast to analyze some really interesting series. Now subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like. In the video, blend your mind. I'm Shimon Oliveira and I'll see you next time. See you then.